In this video, we're going to explore ways that you could expand a single image digital story by adding educational components. So we're going to use the single image digital story that I created based on the photograph of my grandfather's store, where my father, as a young boy, was standing in front of the counter. And we've already seen that I wrote a script, and that was the first part of the project. And I already had the photograph, obviously, and I added music, and I found suitable copyright-free music on a website called Jamendo. And you can hear a bit of the music here. And you can go to jamendo.com and look for music that has a Creative Commons license, which means it's free for you to use in personal projects like digital stories. But then what I wanted to do is I wanted to explore the details in the photograph to see where I could add these educational components. And one of the first things I did was I looked at the calendar on the wall where you could see the days of the week, but you could not tell what year it was. And the year was not visible in this photograph, even when I zoomed in on it. But I found a website called timeanddate.com that has a calendar generator, and I was able to put in years where I found that the first day of the month, for example, was a Friday, and the last day of the month was a Saturday, and then I found out that this was a calendar showing 1926. And I also noticed in the photograph that there were boxes of breakfast cereal called Kellogg's Pep, and I did some further exploration on the web, and I found out that Pep cereal was a sponsor of The Adventures of Superman on the Mutual Radio Network, and I found pictures of Pep cereal and Superman, and I found a Wikipedia page that showed these pieces of information. And then I kept looking, and I found audio from the Adventures of Superman radio broadcast, and we can listen to a little bit of that.
Boys and girls, your attention, please. Presenting a new exciting radio program featuring the thrilling adventures of an amazing and incredible personality. Faster than an airplane, more powerful than a locomotive, impervious to bullets.
So we can look or listen to more of that, and there are a whole series of audio clips online at a site called archive.org. And I also found a television commercial from the 1950s about Kellogg's Pep cereal, and we can take a look at that in just a few seconds. And there it goes. This was on YouTube.
Hey, Ann. Okay, here comes Ann, prettiest girl in school and the liveliest cheerleader of them all. There's a big game today, and no one who'd rather be in Ann's shoes any more than Pat, the kid sister. Well, Pat's day will come. Someday Pat, too, will be one of the prettiest, liveliest girls in school if she builds up strength, builds up energy, builds up strong bones and steady nerves the way Ann does. Ann starts her day with a good, hearty breakfast, including her favorite, Kellogg's Pep.
So this would facilitate all kinds of interesting discussions in a classroom about how fashion has changed and culture has changed and the portrayal of women has changed. And so these are wonderful explorations that you might do related to your single image digital story. Let's go a little further and look at, since my script was about my grandfather, I wanted to know more about him, and he came to the United States in the early 1900s from Eastern Europe, and so I found a map to show the part of the world where my grandfather was born and raised before he came to the U.S. And as I continue looking, this was a grocery store at the time, although much different than today's grocery stores. A market would be more like it, but the name of the store was Robbins Market and Grocery. So you could look at the difference between markets and grocery stores and what kinds of goods they sold. So, for example, there were few refrigerated items in my grandfather's store that I can see in that photograph. And so it didn't look like there were any meats or cheeses or fish for sale, because those were probably sold at different kinds of stores. But anyway, I was interested in how much items cost in a grocery market in 1926. So I found an inflation calculator online at a site called usinflationcalculator.com, and you can put in the year and you can put in the amount, and you can see, for example, that a dollar in 1926 would actually have gone up 1,283% and would have the purchasing power of $13.83 today. So a dollar, if an item cost $1 in 1926, that was a lot. And I also found these items over here showing what grocery items cost in 1926 in some of the major cities in the United States. So, for example, you can see that butter was pretty expensive in 1920, but it actually went down in 1925. And you can look at cheese and chicken and coffee. And again, wonderful topics for exploration in a classroom where you would have students perhaps do explorations on their own. So I also could look at what else was happening in the world in 1926, or in the United States specifically. And I found a graph that shows that in the 1920s, the population of the United States was much less than it is right now. 100 million people lived in the U.S. around 1920, and by 2014, the population had grown to almost 320 million. Fashion, we mentioned a minute ago, is also a topic that might be worth exploring to see how fashions had changed, but that could lead to a whole host of other explorations, furnishings or entertainment or recreation, or all kinds of things that might be different, well, that certainly are different today than they were in 1926. Also, what else was happening? These are some examples of important items, and you can do searches online to see. You can just put in the year and look for happenings that were going on at the time. I also created a word cloud based on the text from the State of the Union speech, which is the important speech that the President of the United States gives once a year when they're in office. And Calvin Coolidge was the President of the U.S. in 1926. And on December 7th, he made an address to Congress called the State of the Union. And you can see the word cloud that was generated by the words in that speech. And so government and people, federal, Congress, national, tariff, work, earners, art, law, are some of the most common words in that speech. And that's kind of interesting if you want to compare like a State of the Union address by a current president with what one given in a previous year. So these are just a few of the many possible explorations that resulted or could result from a photograph like this, where there is lots going on in the picture. So when you are thinking of expanding your single image digital story, you can think about these kinds of explorations and hopefully come up with some even more interesting ones on your own.